Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Rebecca. Today we are going to talk about elevated writing. We're going to talk about when it works and when straightforward, more straight to the point prose is what your novel or memoir needs. Now, writers come to me with this question all of the time, and purple prose, that's that really flowery language that doesn't quite work, pops up in the manuscripts that I edit pretty frequently. I've written plenty of it myself. The question is, when you're revising your novel, how do you decide what writing belongs there? What writing really benefits from metaphor and different literary elements and that sort of elevated prose that can be a lot of fun to read and to write? And when do you want writing that just drives home the point in succinct language? This can be really confusing to sort out when we're doing our revision work, but I have some really simple guidelines that are going to help make that more clear. So let's take a look. Okay, so again, the question is, how do we know when we want to write something simply and in a really straightforward moment that just drives home that point? And when do we want to reach for something a bit more elevated, something lyrical perhaps, that really makes the prose distinctive and memorable? Simple, I want to be really clear, does not mean plain. It does not mean easy. It does not mean amateur. Sometimes writing a simple sentence that really lands with the reader is actually more difficult than writing something very fanciful and lyrical. Your sentence may have a very simple syntax. It may have familiar words that your reader just hears all the time. A simple sentence also has less modifiers and really spotlights, and this is why it's important, it really spotlights and homes in on one clear image. And it is making a very precise observation. And so that's the strength of this kind of sentence and why we want to use it in a way that is very mindful. Simplicity can be highly, highly crafted by the writer. And it can be chosen because a point that you're making is so important that every single detail needs to be precise. A simple sentence can also be there because it just helps with the cadence of the overall paragraph that you're composing. It is not, and I repeat, it is not less artful than a more complex sentence. I want to take an example here of a line by Toni Morrison from her novel Beloved. It was not a story to pass on. Okay, so on the surface, this sentence is very simple. If you've read Beloved, you may remember that she actually reiterates this line 3 times. And each time she states this, the meaning can shift a little. And here's why. Pass on, these very carefully, those simple words can mean a couple different things. They can mean to retell something, or they can mean to hand something down. So what she's doing here is looking at a story that may be too painful to repeat, but it is also too important to skip or ignore. So in that sense, she's providing us, or she's referring to a story that we cannot look away from or forget. So with just this very simple sentence, we can see what a brilliant construction it is. She is holding two opposing ideas at once. We can't pass down this story. We must pass down this story. We have another example of a simple sentence by E.B. White, who wrote, of course, the beloved children's story, Charlotte's Web. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. So this sentence that comes along at the end of the novel is powerful because of its simplicity and its extreme specificity. So we know exactly what is being explained here, and we understand why it should hit our hearts the way it does. Simple sentences can do a lot of different things. They can really clarify a point. They can really hit home the message that your novel or memoir is trying to drive home. It can accelerate. Sometimes we just are trying to pace our story efficiently, and we need to move someplace else where we may spend more time. So it can just accelerate the narrative. It can create a real intimacy. Sometimes what I see when language is too elevated, when it is um, too literary, is that we lose sight of the character or of what it is they're fixated on in that moment. When we say it sweet and simply, bam, there's no denying what is at stake, what that character is feeling, or what they are up against. And so we naturally are going to feel closer to that character in that very streamlined kind of moment. It can also really pack a punch. A simple sentence is very blunt. It can be delivered in a way that maybe a character means for it to be a little harsh, a little bit lacking in nuance. So sometimes that can be really helpful in dialogue, for example. Simple sentences provide emphasis. They can create contrast, as we just saw in Toni Toni Morrison's novel. We can let an image stand without interpretation. Sometimes the author just wants to leave it to the reader to sit with that moment and be with it and make sense of it themselves. And it can also just make an observation feel really, really true because it just instantly lands with the reader. It resonates. They know exactly what the writer means, and there's no guesswork. So these are some of the key things that a very simple sentence can provide. On the other hand, simple prose can also feel really flat and generic. It can feel underdeveloped if we're not careful. So simple prose is powerful when it's actually doing something, when you understand the power behind the sentence structure and the reason that you are using it. So just like simple sentences can be used very mindfully to establish different goals in our stories, elaborate language can do the same. Just like the simple sentence can speed our story up a bit, longer, more elaborate sentences can slow our story down and put the reader in a moment for a longer amount of time. And that's a really nice way to spotlight certain events in a story that are particularly significant. We can also reproduce the movement of thought. This is one of my favorite ways to use longer, more elaborate sentences. And what I mean by this is sometimes our characters' thoughts get really tangled up inside of their heads. And part of reading their story is watching them unravel all those thoughts and make sense of them. In that way, it can be really helpful to use these longer sentences to kind of show all the different tangents and all the different complexity that a character can layer on to aspects of their life, which kind of makes their life more difficult, more complicated, and therefore is a great plot device. Longer, more elaborate language can be used to reveal how a character sees the world. Some of your characters are going to see the world in a way that more simply constructed sentences really align with, while other characters are going to think in terms of complexity, nuance, sometimes, just again, like we said before, just really complicated thinking that can get the best of them. So we can use more complex sentence constructions as a part of characterization. Can use more elaborate language to connect with an image or a memory or some sort of meaning that is particular to your character. These ideas can be very complicated. They can be metaphorical, they can be figurative, right? So sometimes that more elevated language is necessary in order to really do a complicated thought or image the justice it deserves. We can use more complex language to create an atmosphere or a setting and really be able to encompass all the nuance that comes with setting and atmosphere. We can use more complex sentences to help readers make associations they might not normally make. So what I mean by that is employing the use of a metaphor or a simile to help characters think about ideas in really novel, unique ways, and therefore be able to glean some new understanding or ideas that they may not have had beforehand. And finally, using more complex sentence structures can be really helpful just in terms of creating a beautiful cadence and lyricism to your writing. So just like the poet chooses longer words and shorter words in order to create a sound effect, We're doing the same thing in our novels and our memoirs. We want the reader to hear our story as much as to see the story. And when we really vary our sentence structure and have longer sentences and shorter sentences, we just make a really beautiful cadence to our delivery. So, more elevated writing can really move us forward, move our story forward in interesting ways when we use it mindfully. The danger of using this kind of language, and when it starts to dip into what we call purple prose, which I see a lot when I'm doing developmental edits for writers, is that this language can distance the reader from what is happening. If we have really elevated language that doesn't connect to a specific thought with a specific purpose, it can just start to feel like this barrier between what that reader needs to know about the character and feel for the character, and just some sort of prose that doesn't really go anywhere and doesn't really hit us in our hearts. Example from Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Highly recommend this story. She has a sentence here that reads, "The sun was gone, but he had left his footprints in the sky." What a sentence, right? That is stunning. That is what we mean when we talk about sentences that have more complexity, a little bit more texture to them than other examples. The reason that this works is, I mean, all she's doing here is describing a sunset. But in doing so, she is personifying the sun and turning the remaining light into footprints. This metaphor is brilliant because it makes something really familiar feel completely newly observed. Most of us have never thought about a sunset in these terms. And so the language is really asking us to experience the setting, not just simply understand that it's happening, not just know that the sunset is happening. We feel it. And so, what we would want to ask when deciding whether to use a sentence like this is, does the language earn the attention it calls to itself? In order to answer that, we would need to see the larger context of the story. We would need to read the page that it appears on. Alone, this sentence may or may not work. In the context of Hurston's novel, I assure you it works. So, how do we know it works? When does a moment earn this kind of attention and more of this complexity? One example would be when the perception matters. So we're not just seeing a sunset here, we're seeing it through a particular consciousness. And this unusual description is going to reveal something about what the person doing the seeing is feeling, what it is they want us to feel while they are reporting on it. So this would matter when your setting isn't just about establishing time and place. The language is creating this whole emotional texture in the scene that the reader starts to feel drawn into. It signifies this is an important moment. So, an image of someone gone but leaving footprints behind can also be really powerful in the sense that it's echoing this larger feeling of absence or memory. We definitely feel loss or a lingering presence elsewhere in the story we might want to look for. Really, this sentence is sort of flagging our attention and letting us know, hang out here for a minute. There might be more than meets the eye. And we also just really feel like we are slowing down as we read this. As I said before, figurative language just requires us to read more slowly, to linger in a moment and really let it wash over us. So when an ordinary thing becomes significant in a particular moment, and that's what your goal is, then go for it. Most sunsets, they don't need a paragraph. But a sunset that occurs maybe when someone leaves home, when someone has an epiphany of some sort, when someone falls in love or is grieving, when something of significance is happening to your character and you want people to stay there with your character for a little bit longer than they might otherwise, that is a perfect place for some elevated, more complex language. I think that a really helpful way to think about this is in terms of narrative distance. So we can ask ourselves, how close are we to the character's consciousness when the sentence is being written or when it's being shared. So sometimes a really complicated emotional experience is going to demand that complicated language because the thought is already complicated. So we can think about that in terms of associative thinking, contradictory thinking, thinking that goes round and round and your character just can't move forward. If they're having some sort of really intense sensory experience, or something just feels really unfinished and we're trying to make sense of that. These are places where you want to be thinking about narrative distance and how close or far away your sentence construction takes the reader. In a moment where they are having these kinds of thought processes, a more elaborate syntax is actually going to bring the reader in closer to that moment and closer to understanding of your character. But in a moment where the thought is much more simple and it's meant to really resemble the consciousness that your character is feeling at that moment as something that's really direct, language that's too complicated, sentences that have too much complexity to them is really going to have a distancing effect, like we've said. When you're trying to decide, when you're making a decision about your sentence, you want to be thinking about specificity, not decoration. A lot of times when we're new to writing or when we are working on early drafts, we want to make our prose as beautiful and sparkly as we possibly can. Maybe we've read another author that we really admire and we just love the eloquence with which they write. But strong prose isn't memorable because the writer added this flourish or decoration. I want to say that one more time. This is probably the most important point that I want to make today. Strong prose isn't memorable because it's fancy or there's lots of flourish. It's memorable because the language is more exact. It hits the nail on the head. Your reader knows exactly how to feel, exactly what to think when they read the prose that you've provided. So instead of asking, how do I make this sentence more beautiful? How do I sound like the next Maggie O'Farrell? Ask, what is happening here? What is my character noticing? And what would only my character think to compare it to? That's that key information that your reader is looking for, and that's ultimately going to give your reader all the feels you want them to have when they read your story. So another way to think about this is thinking about the rhythm. The decision happens at a paragraph level, not just a scene level, not just sentence by sentence. So if you think about the purpose of a short sentence, it means something different after 5 long sentences than if you had rapid succession of lots of short sentences. It's going to have a different tone, and it's also going to maybe present an idea in a different kind of way or show your character in a different kind of way. A long, unfolding, meandering sentence is going to feel very different after a series of clipped sentences. It's going to mean something different. It's going to sound different. A metaphor can really shimmer if it's around more simple, direct prose. It's going to get lost if it's in the middle of lots of other prose. And that's where your whole paragraph is just going to start to feel too flowery and put on. 3 metaphors in the same paragraph, albeit brilliant metaphors that you don't want to lose sight of, they're going to get lost in a paragraph that already feels cluttered with lots of figurative language or eloquent language. So we want to use our beautiful prose, the stuff that really shimmers, we want to use that sparingly because it will have so much more impact on the reader. And they will really stop and take notice. And we want to ask ourselves, what does the sentence do to the rhythm of the sentences all around it? And I think another really helpful way to think about this is to think about pressure. Sometimes emotional pressure from whatever your character is experiencing can compress language. Let me show you what I mean by that. She knew he wasn't coming back. Now, that is just really clear, right? We kind of feel that thud in our stomachs. He's not coming back. That's all we need to know to understand that this character is about to maybe experience a very sad loss or maybe huge relief. We don't know. But if we are reading the rest of the story and we get that simple, compressed statement, we probably know exactly what we're supposed to feel. Sometimes emotional pressure can expand language because the character themselves can't contain or understand or organize all these different feelings that they're having. So let me show you what I mean by that. She kept thinking about the blue mug beside the sink, the newspaper folded beneath his chair, his shoes waiting by the door. The house was still holding his place for him, as if he hadn't yet received the news. Every room seemed to lean toward the sound of his key in the lock. So now we have a character who is clearly experiencing loss that they may not be able to really label at this stage. They just know that they're having this succession of all these different thoughts and emotions that accompany loss. And so we can ask ourselves, what is pressure doing to a particular character's mind and their voice? That is going to determine how we unfold many of the sentences that express their emotions. Now, this is the kind of thing that I don't really worry about too much in an early draft. If I'm working with a writer on a first draft, even sometimes a second draft, we're not talking about this. But if you are later in your revision process, or if you're just somebody who likes to catch these things early on, there are ways to be on, there's sort of a checklist that you can keep your eye on. When you're revising, you want to be looking for places where the language is doing more than the moment requires. And when you see that, hit delete or move it somewhere else. So some examples are when you see several metaphors or striking images that are competing for their attention, for the reader's attention. And an excellent way to catch these kinds of sentences is just by reading your prose aloud. You will really start to feel what your reader feels when they read something that just has too much going on, too much to follow, and the heart of the idea starts to get lost. If the prose is starting to slow down a moment that actually needs momentum, if we are about to reveal something really important and your reader is on the edge of their seat, completely immersed in that moment, we want to give them what you're promising to deliver. So we don't want to know about the sunset at that point. The language sounds impressive, but it doesn't actually reveal character, atmosphere, emotion, or any significant meaning. I see this a lot when I feel a story has too much purple prose to it. It feels like the writer has had a great time writing, observing. This is all a very important part of the writing life, is to just let that pen move or click away at that keyboard and just feel everything that you're thinking and experiencing. But when it comes time to revise, we really need to put on our editorial cap and be a little ruthless and take some of that out if it is not doing any of these things, because your reader is not going to find that writing as compelling as we might find it as we're writing it. If the observation that you're making, if the language that you're using doesn't feel natural to the POV of the character that you are writing at that moment, and POV is point of view of the character, then you're going to lose points with your reader. They are no longer going to believe in your character in quite the same way. So you really want to mirror the perspective of whoever it is that you're up close and personal to in your story at that moment. If you are explaining an image that we already get, if it already works, don't risk losing your audience by continuing to explain it. Even if you've got a great idea, maybe swap out the ideas if you're finding this more eloquent example to be more persuasive. And finally, if the simpler version lands harder, always go with it. That's your editorial eye showing you clean, streamlined writing that is often efficient and often really gets to the heart of the matter most efficiently. Oftentimes in writing, less is more. Now, there are moments when we're doing revisions when we just really can't decide. This even happens for me as an editor sometimes, where I see something, I'm not quite sure. I might see a writer who has written it both simply and in a more elevated way, and they've put both options next to each other, and I know one needs to go, but I'm not sure which. And I will just read it out loud and I will think about what has just happened? What are these sentences describing? What has the character just perceived in that moment? And then I will make the decision which of these sentences is doing the best trick. So don't be afraid to write a paragraph using, a combination of different kinds of sentences and then deciding what really lands after that. Just make sure your image is specific. Follow your character's associations, play with syntax and metaphor, sound and rhythm, and then just really compare which of these different kinds of sentences really expresses most authentically what it is my character is feeling, seeing, learning, and what of these is really giving your reader the opportunity to have the experience you want for them. And then just choose that sentence. So the key takeaways are, where should the reader's attention be? How is my POV character experiencing this? And which sentences are going to best advance that thinking? What needs to be precise here? What rhythm does my passage need? Is the language revealing something or decorating something? Remember, we want to be on the revealing side of things. What are the sentences around this one already doing? So I really hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions at all, stick them in the comments section. I read all of your comments. I answer as many as I can. Please hit like and subscribe if you would like more videos like this. And I want to tell you about a free webinar that is coming up on September 3rd, 2026. If you are watching this and this time has passed, there is a link in the comments section to the recording. But in the meantime, we have this really special webinar coming up really soon. It's all about finding your way through your revision through a reverse outline. Now, this may be something that you have heard lots about before, this reverse outline. And maybe you're not quite sure how it works, or maybe you've even worked with a reverse outline before, but you're not sure if you're using it correctly. This is one of my favorite revision tools. I use it all the time with writers and with my own work, actually. And it is perfect whether you are a pantser, a plotter, or something in between. There is something for you to glean from a reverse outline if you are thinking about revision. I hope you will come to this webinar. It is free. There will be a replay, but there will be some special treats for people who attend live. So there will be a link in the comments section for this webinar, and there will also be, you can use my QR code here if that is easier for you. Please sign up. Please come. I would love to see you there. Also, I am host of Self-Editing Essentials. This is a group coaching program for people who are writing novels and memoirs and are ready to learn more about self-editing. This is one of my favorite things that I offer writers. If you would like to learn more about it, there is a link in the comments section. There's also a QR code here you can use to learn more about that program. And finally, I hope you will join me for my free weekly writing sprint. It's called Story Circle, and we get together every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. You can write with your camera on or off, but basically it's just your opportunity and mine to write with other writers in community. It is one of the most focused hours of my week. Plenty of writers feel the same. I would love to see you there. So there's a link in the comments section or use the QR code. And I just hope you will keep in touch, keep writing, keep revising, and let me know how it's going.